Welcome back. Last time we concluded our survey of the greatest Masha'i philosophers, and now we will turn to the controversy between Kalam and Falsafa, marking the second phase in the history of Islamic philosophy. The critical period for this is from the mid-11th century through the turn of the 13th century, that is, from Ibn Sina's death in 1037 until the birth of Nasiruddin Tusi, whom we'll consider later, in 1201. The most famous attack of Kalam against Falsafa came from the renowned al-Ghazali, known as al-Ghazal in Latin, who died in 1111, a very easy date to remember. Al-Ghazali is a person like Ibn Sina, about whom one can give a whole course. He's arguably the most famous of all Islamic thinkers in the West. In the Islamic world, he's one of the 3 or 4 most famous. He's the most famous of all the Asharite theologians, even more than al-Ash'ari himself, and also a great master of Sufism. I need to say something about his remarkable life and what he did and stood for that made him so famous in his lifetime and down to our own days. He came from Tus and studied in Neyshabur, a great city of learning until its destruction by the Mongols. His father died when he was a child, and he and his brother were brought up by a friend of their father, a well-known scholar and Sufi, whose house was visited by Sufis and other scholars. Both brothers were remarkable, but the older one who concerns us here is Abu Hamid. His brother Ahmed was 2 years younger and became even more important for Sufism than Abu Hamid, since Ahmed became the supreme authority in Sufism of his age, which must have also influenced his older brother. Turning now to Abu Hamid, by the age of 18, he showed great intellectual prowess and began to study the official sciences. By 30, he was the most famous scholar in the Islamic world. At 33, he was appointed to the most important chair of Shafi'i law in Baghdad at the most important university in the Islamic world. So he had everything, but he began to study the philosophy of Ibn Sina without a teacher to guide him, and he fell into philosophical doubt. He experienced a spiritual crisis. Being the great person he was, he couldn't continue being a professor while this doubt was eating him up. For 2 months he fell sick, and everybody thought he was going to die. And he made a decision that made him so famous. He gave up his chair, left his family in the care of his brother, and left everything in quest of certainty. He spent the next 10 years in the area between Mecca, Medina, and Syria, seeking a remedy for his doubt. And after 10 years of deep spiritual training, he returned to public life, having rediscovered certitude, the foundation for religious life. He refused to return to Baghdad, although the caliph invited him to reoccupy his chair. He went back to his original city of Tus and to Khorasan, and spent the last few years of his life doing 2 things. First, teaching an elite group of students the purely esoteric subjects of Sufism, and second, writing more popular books for the public at large until his death at 55 in 1111. Al-Ghazali was a master of prose in both Arabic and Persian. He wrote his autobiography, Deliverance from Error, in Arabic, that's been translated by Montgomery Watt as The Faith and Practice of Al-Ghazali. This is one of the masterpieces of autobiographical literature, and it's compared to the autobiography of St. Augustine, the Confessions, which reveal his life and thought processes. Al-Ghazali talks about his loss of certitude and his attempt to rediscover it, and how he rediscovered a kind of knowledge involving inward spiritual vision, based upon the heart knowledge. He divided the various seekers after knowledge in the Islamic world, declaring those who had attained the highest knowledge were the Sufis, since they are able to attain direct knowledge of God, and it's that which brings complete certitude. Al-Ghazali wrote Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, where he takes them to task, and condemns Ibn Sina and the Masha'i school on 3 major and 19 minor points for being against Islam. We'll just focus on the major points here. 1, the fact that they do not believe in the resurrection of the body. 2, God's knowledge of particulars. And 3, the creation of the world from nothing. These three major issues were either unanswered or answered poorly by the Masha'i philosophy. Ibn Sina said he couldn't prove the resurrection of the body, but he didn't deny it. He accepted it on faith. And Mullah Sadra later on takes both al-Ghazali and Ibn Sina to task. He says both of them were wrong, because al-Ghazali attacked philosophy for not proving the resurrection of the body, because peripatetic philosophy was not competent for that task. But that doesn't mean no philosophy can do it, since Mullah Sadra did it later. And then he criticizes Ibn Sina also for not being able to prove the resurrection of the body. Regarding the question of God's knowledge of particulars, the Quran states, "Not a leaf falls, but God knows it." But the Masha'i philosophers only had awkward proofs on this issue. And the most difficult of all issues is the question of the createdness or uncreatedness of the world. The theologians refuted the eternity of the world because they thought this would create a partner with God. But the philosophers said that, in fact, you could not have a particular moment at which God created the world, because that would introduce change into the divine nature. At one moment, he is not a creator, and at another moment, he is. You cannot have any of the divine names have their effects stopped. That's a metaphysical principle. You cannot say that God is just, but there's no justice around. As in other debates within Islamic thought, both sides were trying to protect Tawheed. Ibn Rushd attempted to reply to al-Ghazali's critique by writing Tahafut, the incoherence of the incoherence. But he wasn't very influential in this regard, and there were rebuttals and further critiques from other remarkable theologians, such as Fakhruddin Razi. I will close by highlighting the fact that al-Ghazali also sought to revive the whole of Islamic society by rejuvenating ethics within society to be based not only on fear of law, but also on an inner spiritual attitude towards the good. And to that end, he wrote his major masterpiece, Ihya Ulumuddin, the revivification of the sciences of religion. This is the most important work of Islamic ethics and spiritualizes it. At the end of his life, al-Ghazali crystallized the metaphysical teachings of Sufism in several short treatises like The Niche of Lights, Mishkat al-Anwar, the first major commentary upon the light verse of the Quran. So the great achievements of al-Ghazali were firstly the curtailment of the power of rationalism in Islamic civilization, and secondly, the formalization of Sufism, both of which create a bend in the river of Islamic philosophy to which we now turn.